Welcome to the first in our series of online lectures for Western Civ 1. These lectures help us because they allow us to cover material outside of class that we simply don't have time to cover in class. That said, the material on these lectures is just as important as anything that we do in class or anything that we do in our textbooks. So please, as you're watching this lecture, please take good notes. I'll try to help you by providing you with some of the key terms that you should be able to identify by the time this lecture is over. There also are some key questions that you should be able to answer by the time you get to the last slide. That said, don't limit your notes simply to these terms and these questions. Please note anything that you think might help you to better understand the subject that we're covering in this lecture. If you have any questions, please jot those down as well. You can always raise them in class, or send me an email, or stop by my office hours. Anyway, with that said, let's get to the first slide. We're going to begin this story at the very beginning. It is believed that modern human beings emerged sometime between 200,000 and 150,000 years ago. The name for these creatures was Homo sapiens, which simply means wise human being. In other words, what made the Homo sapien a Homo sapien was the size of his or her brain. You can see it in these numbers. They measure the capacity of the skull, and they show how the human brain has evolved over thousands of years. You can see at the very top, chimpanzees have a brain capacity of about 300 to 500 cubic centimeters. Homo sapiens, on the other hand, are three times or even larger, or even more than that. So, what makes us human is the size of our brain. But while brain size is most important, it's not the only thing that makes modern human beings modern. We also have smaller mouths and jaws, a lighter frame, and a flatter forehead. The story of modern humanity begins in Africa, where the first Homo sapiens evolved. However, we didn't stay in Africa for long. Over the next 100,000 years or so, humans were on the move, leaving Africa sometime around 70,000 years ago, and migrating into Asia, Europe, Australia, and lastly into North and South America. Now, let's move on to another one of the terms we need to understand. Often when we speak of early human culture, we refer to what was known as the Paleolithic Age. This period lasted from 2.5 million years ago to about 10,000 years ago. The term Paleolithic refers to the tools used by early human beings, and even the ancestors of early human beings. Paleolithic means Old Stone Age. And that refers to then the tools that early human beings used. Those tools included stone arrow points, stone spears, stone hammers, stone fishhooks, etc., etc., etc. But stone tools were not the only things that developed by early human beings. Early human beings also domesticated the dog around 30,000 years ago. Why? Well, it's thought that human beings and dogs learned that they could really help one another out. Dogs, with their acute sense of hearing, could provide an early warning system should anyone or anything seek to do a band of Homo sapiens harm. At the same time, human beings provided dogs with a reliable source of food and warmth. It really was a win-win situation for both species. Another development that occurred during this time were the first works of art. Human beings began to paint pictures on the walls of their caves. Some of the best examples of Paleolithic art were found on the walls of a series of caves in Lascaux, France. These paintings depict a series of images that show us what these people valued and how they lived. So, what do the paintings depict? You'll notice on this slide and on subsequent slides, they liked to depict animals. They often depicted the animals that they were hunting, or the animals that they saw around them. That clearly showed how important these animals were to their culture. Here are more examples of this early cave art. Here's another example. And yet another example. So how did these people actually live? Well, their world was quite different from our own. Much of this was due to the way they got their food. These people did not practice agriculture or herd animals. Instead, they were what was known as hunter-gatherers. So what's a hunter-gatherer? Well, obviously, it's a people that gets its food by gathering wild plants and hunting wild game. But that lifestyle, as simple as it might sound, made all the difference in the cultures that these people were to develop. Why? Well, let's look at what life was like for a hunter-gatherer. There are a number of characteristics that set these people apart from our own civilized culture today. First, hunter-gatherer communities were very small. Typically, they were no bigger than 20 to 30 people. In other words, probably 1 to 2 extended families. Why? Well, hunting and gathering produces a very limited amount of food. You can only reliably hunt and gather enough food on a daily basis to feed about 20 to 30 people. This fact kept hunter-gatherer bands small. So what would happen if a band grew beyond that size? Well, typically that band would break off and form another band, or I should say a group from that band would break off and form another independent band. Hunter-gatherers also tended to be nomadic. In other words, they moved around a lot. Why? Well, again, this is pretty simple. Hunter-gatherer bands had to keep moving because they had to keep searching for their food. They moved to follow herds of migrating animals. Moreover, if you stayed in one place for too long, you're going to pick up all the berries and you're going to gather all of the edible roots. You simply have to move along in order to survive. Hunter-gatherers had very few personal possessions. Typically, it was only the barest essentials. The tools that they needed, for example, to process foods, or the weapons that they needed to protect themselves, or to hunt animals with. That's because they couldn't carry too much because they moved around so much. Hauling a lot of stuff from one place to another was simply too difficult. So therefore, it was really only those essential things that they absolutely had to have to survive that they would carry from one place to another. In fact, this is probably one of the things that if we were to bring a hunter-gatherer band into our midst, they'd be amazed by all the stuff that we've got. Because, of course, we don't move around, so therefore we're able to accumulate lots and lots of stuff. Hunter-gatherer bands were also roughly egalitarian. In other words, everyone was more or less equal. Why? Well, think about it. What's the most important thing to a hunter-gatherer? Survival. Everyone who played a role in either hunting or gathering food was critical to the survival of that band. Thus, no one individual was more important than another. Moreover, because everyone was equal, all food was shared. Just because you killed the deer did not mean you got to keep it. Everyone shared in the kill because everyone was important. Moreover, women played a huge role in most hunter-gatherer cultures. Why? Well, again, it goes back to food. Gathering was women's work. Moreover, gathering was a far more reliable way to produce food than hunting. You never knew if you were going to be able to kill that deer or kill that woolly mammoth. But women were almost always able to find something that they could eat, that the band could eat. Because of this, men and women were treated roughly as equals in many of these bands. Still, the life of a hunter-gatherer band was a tough one. Specifically, those lives were much shorter than our lives today. The life expectancy of a man was about 35 years, while women died younger, typically at about 30 years. Nevertheless, many experts believe that these people lived healthier lives than we live today. There's even an entire diet craze surrounding this belief. It's called the paleo diet, and it emphasizes the consumption of raw fruits and vegetables and meat. Grains are avoided, as are any and all sugars and processed foods. As this chart indicates, the health and benefits of a paleo lifestyle included the fact that essentially they seem to have fewer allergies, they seem to have more stable blood sugar, they seem to have better skin and even better teeth, improved sleep, and so on and so on and so forth. Should you be interested in trying a paleo diet, this chart will give you some idea of what's allowed and what is not allowed on that diet. In conclusion, early human beings lived lives that are very different than the ones that we live today. As hunter-gatherers, they did not build cities, nor did they live within anything we would today call civilization. Why? Well, much of that has to do with agriculture. Early human beings simply did not plant crops or raise livestock for food. In fact, the development of agriculture is going to be one of the most fundamental changes in human history. In short, agriculture will change everything. But that's a topic for one of our next lectures.